They built a steel gate across the only road that touched my property, locked the keypad, and told me I was no longer allowed to drive to my own cabin. For a while, I had to sit there in my truck like some trespasser staring at a road my family had used for decades. The funny part is, that same HOA now pays me every single month just for the right to drive across my land, and their big shiny gate turned into my favorite line of passive income. My name's Larry Stewart, and I don't scare easy, but I'll be honest with you, this one pushed me right to the edge. When my Uncle Raymond passed in 2018, I thought I was just inheriting a quiet patch of woods outside a small town, not signing up for a slow-burn war with a homeowners association. The land is about 28 acres tucked behind a subdivision called Crestview Hills, with a little hunting cabin, a clear creek, and a gravel driveway that runs down to an old strip of pavement called Old Mill Road. That road is the only way in or out. No back trail, no secret exit, just that one lane connecting my gate to the rest of the world. Back in the 80s when my uncle bought it, Old Mill Road was still a county-maintained public road. The county graded it twice a year, plowed snow in the winter, all that. Then in the 90s, the budget tanked, the county stopped maintaining the outer section, and a developer came along, built Crestview Hills, and set up an HOA to manage the roads and common areas. My uncle wasn't a fan of HOAs. He called them little kingdoms with too much power. But the first board was friendly. They had an informal deal he could keep using the road as long as he didn't destroy it, and he already had a recorded easement giving him the legal right to use Old Mill Road to get to his property. He'd patch a pothole here and there, trim branches out of the ditch wave at people walking their dogs. Simple neighborly stuff. When he died and the property passed to me, I tried to keep everything as low-key as he did. I work as a civil engineer about 40 minutes away, so I'd drive out mostly on weekends, roll down the gravel drive in my old F-150 windows down air full of pine and creek water. For the first couple of years, it was peaceful. I'd ease through the subdivision, maybe 200 yards of houses and mailboxes, wave at kids on bikes, nod at joggers. An older neighbor named Paul Gardner would flag me down sometimes to talk fishing or ask if the creek was running high. Nobody complained, nobody mentioned rules or fees. I wasn't part of their HOA, and I was totally fine with that. Then Aurora Mitchell became president. If you've ever dealt with an HOA Karen, you already know her type. Early 50s, silver blonde hair that never moves, pearl earrings while she's gardening, and a clipboard like it's glued to her hand. I met her at the mailbox cluster. She walked up with that tight professional smile and said, "So you're the cabin owner up the hill. We were just discussing your access at our last board meeting." That sentence should have been my first red flag. My right to reach my own land had become a topic on her agenda. Aurora came from some corporate management background, and she ran Crestview Hills like it was her personal organization chart. Within a few months, she had speed bumps installed like landmines every 100 feet, new signs put up about parking, new rules about trash cans, and she hired a private security company to monitor non-residents. I figured she was just one of those people who needs projects to feel important. As long as the road stayed open and my easement stood, she could play hall monitor all she wanted. Then the email landed in my inbox. Subject line, "Notice to non-resident road users." It was addressed to non-resident road user like I didn't even have a name. It said that anyone regularly using Old Mill Road who wasn't an HOA member now had to pay a mandatory maintenance fee of $150 per quarter. Failure to pay could result in revoked access privileges. I remember laughing and then realizing they were dead serious. Access privileges to reach my own family land. I didn't blow up. I replied calmly, attached a PDF of the recorded easement, and explained that my right to use Old Mill Road wasn't some favor from Crestview Hills, it was in the county records. I told them I was happy to contribute in reasonable ways, but that they couldn't treat my access like a gym membership. I hit send and waited. No reply. 2 weeks later, there was a different letter, this one hand-delivered and stuck in my gate like a citation. It warned that unpermitted vehicles could be towed from private HOA roadways, and that non-authorized users would be treated as trespassers. At the bottom, "Sincerely, Aurora Mitchell, HOA President." My first reaction was that cold, heavy feeling in your stomach when you realize someone is trying to push you into a corner and calling it policy. I wrote another response, quoted state law, referenced the easement, again tried to keep it civil. Again, silence. But I started noticing men in orange vests walking along Old Mill Road with measuring wheels and spray paint. New stakes appeared near the culvert. Word trickled through the neighborhood that the HOA was upgrading security. I figured maybe they were adding cameras or a little gate at the entrance. I didn't realize they were planning to put a wall right across my lifeline. One Friday afternoon, as I was loading lumber into my truck, my phone buzzed. It was Paul. His voice was low, like he didn't want anyone to overhear. "Larry, they're putting up a gate," he said. "Right on Old Mill. Looks like it's going to sit between your drive and the highway." I froze. "A gate across the road." "Big steel thing," he said. "Automatic keypad, the whole deal. Aurora says it's for resident safety." I drove out there that evening, and there it was. A massive black steel gate spanning the entire width of Old Mill Road with a keypad, a camera, and a shiny sign that said, "Private property, residents only." I sat in my truck for a second, just staring at this monument to arrogance standing exactly where my family's driveway met the world. Then I pulled up the HOA website, found the number, and called. Aurora answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Mitchell," I said as calmly as I could, "there's a new gate blocking Old Mill Road." "Yes," she replied, sounding proud. "It was approved by the board for residents only. We have to protect our community." "I need that road to reach my property," I reminded her. "There's an easement on record." "You're not a resident, Mr. Stewart," she said, "but you can apply for guest access. There's a small annual fee and a background check. Standard procedure." I let that sink in. "So I need your permission and a guest pass to drive to my own land." She gave a short laugh. "If you'd like to discuss it further, you're welcome to request a slot at our next board meeting." Then she hung up. That night I drove back to the gate just in case this was some insane misunderstanding. The keypad glowed red like it was mocking me. I pressed the call button. A robotic voice told me to contact HOA management. I called the number on the sign. It rang until voicemail. I left a message. Tried again. Nothing. I sat there in the dark for almost an hour. My own property a few minutes up the road, completely blocked by a group of neighbors who had decided I didn't count. Eventually, headlights pulled up behind me. A sedan stopped, the window rolled down, and Paul leaned out. "Locked out, huh?" he asked quietly. "Looks that way," I said. "Apparently I'm not on the approved list." He shook his head. "Aurora told everyone at the last meeting you're freeloading off our road. Said you refused to pay your share, called you some off-grid squatter. People clapped. You know how folks get when someone talks about protecting property values?" He sighed, and then did the one thing that probably got him in trouble later. He reached out and punched a code into the keypad. The gate slid open with a slow, metallic groan. "You didn't get that from me," he muttered. Driving through that gate with it closing behind me was the moment the whole situation snapped into focus. This wasn't a misunderstanding. She wasn't confused about the easement. She was testing how far she could push, how much control she could grab. I promised myself right then I wouldn't touch that gate. I wouldn't scream at neighbors. I wouldn't do anything she could spin as me being the unreasonable one. I was going to fight her where she couldn't talk over me, in the records and in court. The next morning I called my friend James Porter, a real estate lawyer I'd worked with on infrastructure jobs. I laid everything out. The letters, the gate, the recorded easement, the voicemails. He didn't laugh, didn't tell me to let it go. He just said, "Larry, HOAs pull this kind of thing more than you'd believe. Every road, every plat, every easement has a history. Let's go dig." We spent days in the county recorder's office flipping through old plats, deeds, survey maps that looked older than both of us abandonment orders from the 90s. I'd come straight from job sites still wearing my work boots, and we'd sit there tracing lines on faded paper while a bored clerk watched us from behind a counter. And finally, buried in that mess of ink and dust, we found it. When the county stopped maintaining Old Mill Road in 1994, they didn't hand the whole thing to the HOA. The first quarter-mile section near the highway, the exact stretch where the gate stood, sat on a reserved easement attached to the original land my uncle bought. That easement passed to me when I inherited the property. So legally, that section of Old Mill wasn't HOA controlled at all. It was my easement tied directly to my land. The posts for Aurora's expensive new gate were planted right on my property interest. I remember staring at the plat, heart pounding, and saying, "You're telling me they built their gate on my easement?" James grinned. "I'm telling you they built their front door on your land, and they're charging you to knock." We copied everything color-coded. It built a neat little packet. James drafted a cease and desist letter that was the politest threat I've ever seen. It ordered Crestview Hills HOA to stop obstructing my easement to remove any barrier from the section across my parcel within 30 days, and warned that continued interference would be treated as trespass and unlawful restriction of easement rights. We sent it certified. 3 days later, Aurora called me. Her voice could have rusted steel. "Mr. Stewart, I received your letter. You seem confused about the ownership of that road." "I'm not confused," I said. "The recorder's office isn't confused either. The gate is standing on my easement." "Crestview Hills has maintained that road for decades," she snapped. "Continuous maintenance establishes our claim. It's effectively private HOA property." "Not over an active recorded easement," I replied. "The law is pretty clear on that." Silence. Then she hissed, "You're bluffing." "Check your mailbox," I said. "The paperwork is all in there. Take your time." Her lawyer jumped in next with a long email threatening to counterclaim and accusing me of harassment. James read it and actually laughed. "They're arguing feelings," he said. "We've got filings." So we filed for an injunction. On the day of the hearing, I sat on a bench outside the courtroom with my binder on my lap, feeling that weird mix of calm and adrenaline. Aurora showed up in a spotless white blazer, flanked by 2 board members and her attorney like she was heading into a press conference. She glanced at me like I was something she'd scrape off her shoe. When the judge came in and everything settled, James laid out our case step by step: the original purchase, the county abandonment, the easement history, and finally the GPS-tagged photos of the gatepost standing on my easement. Aurora's lawyer tried to argue that decades of maintenance and control had basically turned the road into their private asset. The judge held up his hand. "Counsel," he said, "the easement in question remains active in the record, correct?" The lawyer shifted. "Technically, yes, but—" "Then your client has erected a barrier on land she does not own," the judge said. "She is obstructing a valid easement. The gate comes down, access is restored, and any future obstruction will be treated as contempt." Just like that. Months of stress being painted as some mooch using their road being locked out of my own land. All of it flipped with one ruling. The first twist was realizing the gate was sitting on my easement. The second came when James and I were walking back to the parking lot afterward. He said, "You know that quarter mile doesn't just let you drive through. It also means in a very real way they've been driving across your rights for years without paying a dime." I frowned. "What are you getting at?" "They've been using that stretch to reach their pretty little subdivision," he said. "You could revoke their use, or you could lease it. Fair market rate. Let them pay to drive on what you own. They wanted to charge you for access. Legal karma says it goes the other way now." I thought about every letter, every time I sat at that gate, every smug line about access privileges. I started to smile. "You're saying I can charge the HOA rent to use their own entrance?" "I'm saying it was never truly theirs," he replied. "And yeah, if they're smart, they'll sign." We did our homework, looked at private road agreements, calculated what it would cost them to build a new access factored in maintenance. Then James sent a formal notice to the HOA board. From now on, any vehicular use of Old Mill Road across my easement would require written consent in the form of a lease. We proposed a monthly fee, reasonable but not cheap, plus a small settlement for past interference. Otherwise, continued use would be trespassing. They called a special meeting and invited me. I walked into that community room where they usually argued about flower beds and mailbox paint. The treasurer, a nervous older guy named Harold, shuffled some papers. Aurora sat at the end of the table, tight-lipped. Harold cleared his throat. "Mr. Stewart, we'd like to resolve this amicably. The association is willing to offer a one-time payment of $5,000 for continued use of the road." He pushed a paper toward me like he was offering a peace treaty. I slid it back. "I appreciate the gesture," I said, "but it doesn't cover what you've already done or the value of that access. Here's what I'm willing to do. We sign a formal lease. You pay a monthly fee adjusted for inflation, and in return you get guaranteed use in writing. No surprises, no gates, no drama. It's a lot cheaper than losing your only paved entrance or fighting me in court again." Aurora snapped before anyone else could speak. "This is extortion," she hissed. "You're holding this community hostage." "No," I said quietly. "What you did when you welded a gate across someone else's easement and then tried to charge them to use it, that was holding someone hostage. This is just a contract. And you all know what happens to your property values if this road gets shut down. Imagine explaining to buyers why they have to take a 4-mile detour down a muddy county track because your HOA president picked the wrong hill to die on. You really want to roll those dice?" The room went quiet. The board members looked at each other, then at the papers, then at Aurora. They weren't loyal soldiers anymore. They were tired people looking at a very expensive mistake. A couple of weeks later, they signed the lease. The first time I got a check from Crestview Hills Homeowners Association with road easement lease, typed in the memo line, I just sat there at my kitchen table staring at it. The same group that once tried to bar me from my own driveway was now paying monthly rent to cross my land. That was the moment the whole power dynamic flipped for good. But Aurora didn't go quietly. She sent out newsletters painting me as some greedy outsider profiting from their road. She told residents I was extorting the neighborhood. Only problem for her. People had seen the court documents. They knew she'd put a gate on land she didn't own and dragged the community into an expensive legal mess. At the next election, her name wasn't even on the ballot. A woman named Susan Miller became president, and the first thing she did was call me to apologize. "We just want to move forward," she said. "We'll honor the lease and stick to the court order." For a while, the neighborhood calmed down. The checks came on time, the road stayed open, and I could actually enjoy my cabin again. If the story ended there, it would already be satisfying, but people like Aurora don't accept losing control. She still lived in Crestview Hills, still hovered at meetings, still whispered to anyone who'd listen that I was the villain. One morning, I walked down near the edge of my property and saw survey flags and fresh tire tracks in the dirt. A bulldozer sat half on my land, half on theirs, with a couple of guys in hard hats clearing brush. "Morning," I said. "What's going on here?" One of them pointed at some rolled-up plans. "Secondary access road for the HOA," he said. "Mitchell Construction. We're supposed to cut a new route around that leased section." I just smiled. Of course it was her family company. I called the county zoning office. The inspector checked her system and said, "They didn't file anything. If they're grading on private property without a permit, that's a problem." She drove out, looked at the bulldozer, looked at my deed, and slapped a bright orange stop work notice on the machine. That was the end of that road. A few nights later, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from a camera I'd installed near the easement line. Next morning, the small barrier arm I'd put up to monitor traffic was snapped in half, the camera housing dented and hanging by a wire. The footage, though, was crystal clear. There was Aurora in a dark jacket, bolt cutters in one hand and a crowbar in the other, tearing into my equipment like she was breaking into a bank vault. I handed the videos to the sheriff. She ended up facing vandalism charges, and the HOA issued an emergency notice banning her from meetings and community facilities. That was the moment her own neighbors stopped seeing her as their protector and started seeing her as a liability. One afternoon, she showed up at the foot of my driveway, standing there like a ghost from a bad chapter. I walked down, stopped at the gate, and waited. "You humiliated me," she said finally. "You turned everybody against me." "No," I said. "You did that when you tried to wall me off my own land and ignored the law. I just refused to roll over. There's a difference." She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, then shut it again. A couple of days later, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. She sold the house at a loss and moved out of town. I heard she ended up in Florida. You can draw your own conclusions about how that worked out. These days, life around Old Mill Road is quiet again. Susan runs the HOA like a normal human being. The residents focus on drainage problems and block parties instead of guerrilla legal warfare. Once a year, we update the lease terms, and on the first of every month, money slides into my account labeled Crestview Hills Easement Payment. I sit on my cabin porch with a cup of coffee, listen to cars rolling along that stretch of pavement, and instead of feeling angry, I just hear the sound of my property taxes being paid. Looking back, I went through every stage you can imagine: confusion, humiliation, anger, that stubborn determination you get when somebody underestimates you one time too many. But in the end, I didn't win by shouting or breaking something. I won by outlasting them, by knowing where the lines were drawn and forcing everyone else to respect them too. My uncle used to say, "Land remembers who respects it." At the time, it sounded like one of those things old men say sitting by a creek. Now it makes perfect sense. The land didn't pick a side, it just sat there with its lines and its history and waited for the truth to catch up. Aurora tried to move those lines with a clipboard and a gate. The law moved her out instead. So if you're watching this and you've dealt with an HOA or a neighbor who thinks they own the world, I want to hear about it. Whose side would you have been on if you lived in Crestview Hills? The guy with the easement just trying to get to his cabin, or the president who built a gate on someone else's land in the name of protecting the community? Do you think making the HOA pay rent was fair justice or too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments, tell me your own HOA or neighbor horror stories, and let me know what you would have done in my shoes. And if you want more real stories about people standing their ground and letting justice work the right way, hit like, hit subscribe, and stick around. Because out here on Old Mill Road, there's always another gate waiting for someone to push back.